Remembrance Day is an opportunity for all of us to remember those who have lost their lives in conflict, making such an extraordinary sacrifice, believing that the lives of those who live on would be better, that the world would be a better place. It's a time for us to think deeply about the impact of war on individuals, on families, communities and countries. Humanists UK are proud to represent non-religious armed forces personnel at remembrance ceremonies across the UK to pay our respects to those whose lives have been lost or forever changed in war and conflict. For just over a century, the focus of the national ceremony has been the cenotaph in London. It was set up after the First World War, a war that unveiled the terrible cruelty and barbarism that humans could be capable of. The armistice had been signed on the 11th of November 2018, and the peace treaty with Germany was signed in June the following year. And then on the 19th of July 1919, the country celebrated Peace Day. Beacons were lit on summits, and in London, thousands gathered to take part in a parade. The procession ended in Whitehall with the laying of wreaths at the foot of a temporary monument to the fallen, designed by the architect Sir Edwin Lutyens. This wood and plaster cenotaph was replaced with a permanent version in Portland stone the following year. In Britain, it's of course easy to focus on remembrance from a purely British point of view, but it's very important to place remembrance in a global context, because so many countries were pulled into the violence, so many families were devastated by that conflict. And actually, even if we do just focus on Britain for a moment, we must remember all of those who fought alongside British forces in the First World War. The Australian and New Zealand Armed Forces, the Indian Army, the West Indies Regiment, the South African Overseas Expeditionary Force, armed forces from Newfoundland, and closer to home, thousands of Irishmen who joined the British forces. The tragedy of the First World War, though, was felt all over the world, and regardless of nationality, age, service, gender, colour, race or religion. Its impacts were felt by armed forces personnel, by civil servants, by those in the emergency services, and of course innocent civilians, families and even animals. Within Britain, there's a need for a national ceremony to be inclusive. Around a third of defence personnel identify as non-religious. And so since 2018, Humanists UK has been invited to take part in the National Service of Remembrance at the Cenotaph in Westminster, where we're pleased to be able to represent those with a non-religious worldview. The Cenotaph itself stands a century on as a permanent memorial to the fallen, but also as a permanent reminder of the atrocities of war, the terrible toll it exerts. Because remembrance is not about glorifying war, it is against glorification. And this act of remembrance that was instated at the end of the First World War now embraces all those affected by subsequent conflicts as well. We now pay tribute to everyone whose lives were lost or deeply affected by a century of conflicts.